Good morning, everyone. Now, with the attendance being what it is, so I sat beside Joe here and I asked him the question. Okay, so what do we think this is? Is this the hour jump? Is this people starting to feel the anxiety because of Corona? You know what? And Joe's like, it's the hour jump. It's the hour jump. People are going to be walking in during your sermon. You know, so regardless of what it is, if you're in your normal seat and you're like, I just want to stay in my normal seat, that's great. If you're in your normal seat and you see a bunch of seats in front of you and you would like to come up and be a little bit closer to some other folks, we'd love to have you come up and be a little bit closer because, you know, it is what it is today. There, done, whatever. Stewardship. Stewardship Sunday will be a couple of Sundays from now. The letter has been sent out to you with the estimated giving card. If you have not received that correspondence, please call the office and let us know so that we can get you the correspondence, so that we can get you the card, so that you can be prayerful about that. In regard to stewardship, we have we'll have some fun things for next Sunday. I'll just tease that and just leave that out there, and you'll be like, what's he talking about? And I'll just be like, well, now you got to show up next Sunday. Invite everybody else. So there you go. So we have some fun stuff in regard to stewardship next Sunday, and then we will receive the estimated giving card the following week. So there it is. Family Promise, our next opportunity to serve is March 25th and 26th. So we've got a couple of weeks from now, but if you are able to serve, whether it be in terms of food or in terms of the overnight, we would love to be able to have your help and your support in regard to that. The last announcement, well, two more announcements that I got. If you're heading to New Brunswick for the RCA vision conversation, please let me know. If we have the opportunity to be able to carpool, I would love to be able to take advantage of that. That is this upcoming Saturday over at New Brunswick Seminary from 9:30 till 4:30. Full day, so we'd love to have you be a part of that. The last announcement that I got is in regard to the mission trip that we're heading off to in the end of July, the beginning part of August. We got an interesting note, and by we I mean Sheila got an interesting call from our coordinators who were helping us put the mission trip together. They let us know that the United Methodist Church, whom we're partnering with, is closing 15 of the 18 sites? 13 of 15. So they're closing 13 of the 15 sites on May 31st because of financial difficulties. So there's a $1 million budget cut or something along those lines, and they're closing 13 of these 15 mission sites. They're shifting us. We're being shifted to another site in North Carolina during that same week. We haven't confirmed where we're going to be landing yet. Just keep that whole process in prayer. There's, especially with all of the news that's going around the world and whatnot in regard to infections and whatnot, there's a lot of fear, and people are acting and reacting out of fear. And one of the places where that we end up feeling that is folks not being cared for, not being loved, because folks start caring for themselves. It becomes very insular. I understand that fear is there. Are there ways that we are able to work through that fear, beyond that fear, in order to be able to care for those who are in need, so that we are able to be with one another, even in extreme circumstances? So, Jill?
Actually, we've just heard that we have got another site in North Carolina. It's called Aurora, North Carolina. And I put up a sign-up sheet, which is out there, that just says you'd like some more information. All of the sheets that I did, I need to update.
That's right. So
just kind of like some information. That doesn't mean to say you're going or you're committed, but that I know to communicate with you.
all right. So we are en route and starting to figure all of that out. Thank you very much, Sheila, for being willing to hear you. So those are the announcements that I have. I invite you to look over the rest of them and let us worship the Lord together. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made the heavens and the earth.
Darkness tries to roll over my bones. Sorrow comes to steal joy I know. Brokenness and pain is all I know. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fears don't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I am not captive to the not afraid to leave my past behind. I won't be shaken. I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Power that can empty me. Power that can empty out of me. Resurrection power that can save. Power in your name. Power in your name. Sing that again. Power that can break. Power that can break out every chain. Power that can empty out of me. Resurrection power that can save. Power in your name. Power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Standing in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Do we dare place our trust in God? Are we willing to continue on the journey when we don't know the dangers and are not sure of the destination? Let us step forward boldly, listening for God's call in our life.
Let us place our trust in God always.
Let's all rise as we sing. Open our eyes, Lord, let us see all that you are, all that you mean. Open our ears, Lord, let us hear all that you are, be loud and clear. We crying out in desperation, waiting now in expectation, crying out in desperation for you. So cry, Lord, we're crying out in desperation, waiting now in expectation, crying out in desperation for you. Heaven, fall down. Spirit, pour out. Heaven, fall down. Heaven, fall down. Spirit, pour out on us all now. Heaven, fall down.
Grace and peace to you from God our Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. Let us remain safe. Let us greet one another. Be comfortable with one another in ways, but let us greet one another by exchange of the peace of Christ. If you're in place. Our next hymn this morning is hymn number 354, Leading on the Everlasting Arms, hymn 354. take that time which is necessary in order to remember who we are, remember who God is, and who we are to God, and how God is able to work in and through us. I know you've only got a few things there to figure out, but you start in that place by offering this prayer. Hear these words. If they make sense for you and for where you're at, spiritually, emotionally, and in your journey of faith, then hold on to them. Use them during your week. If you read them and you're like, it doesn't feel like me, you know the words that do make sense for you. Offer those words up. If you need to write them down, I'm one of those who does. If you need to write them down. Write them down. Have them with you. Have them in a place that is able to remind you of where we start with God. Start from that place of confession. Allow His grace to flow in. Let us pray. Lord, we are such stubborn people. We want to know all the answers. We find it hard to place our trust even in your Son. When Jesus proclaims that we can have a new life, we want to know how this is possible. How can we get rid of the old burdens and difficulties and start over again? New life is possible when we place our trust in God's saving care. Forgive us and help us, gracious Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Friends, this is the good news of Jesus Christ, who are forgiven. Thanks be to God. Here are also the words of our Lord Jesus Christ, as He said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength." It's the first and great commandment. The second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Let's thank God for all the ways that His law is at work in our lives here today.
Grace for the broken hearted, grace for the wounded soul.
know there are not many kids, but those of you who are here, come on down front so we can chat for a couple of minutes. Not that I can look at all of you, but come on. All right, we're gonna sit here. See, I mean, last week we had what? 20? We had 20 kids over here. This is amazing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good morning. It is good to see all of you. So, last week we started to talk about routine and all that sort of stuff. And I asked about how can you be intentional about having God be in your routine. So, I don't want you to, if you want to think about your own life, I'm okay with that. But this doesn't need to be for just you. So think about your friends, think about your teachers, think about your family. What are some ways that we can have God be a part of an intentional, a different part of our life? Let me back all that up because Pastor Ryan said about 17 different things and none of it sounded coherent. How can we be more intentional about having God be part of our life? How can we no longer live life as usual? How can we have God be more intentionally a part of our life, our family's life, our friends' life? What are some suggestions that you would have? I have this little golf pencil with this nub of a point, and I have this piece of paper upon which I will scribe some answers. All right. So, what do you think? What are some possibilities? Praying. Okay. For whom? For how? When? Not to throw 3 questions at you and have you answer all of them simultaneously, but go. Pray. So, great answer. I agree with that. How? When? What do you think? Morning. Okay. What would you pray? What do you think would be a good prayer in the morning when you get up? Have a good day. I like that. Okay. What else? What are some other ideas? Pray before a test. What are you praying before? Oh, come on. We chuckle because we've all done it. That's why. All right. That is absolutely true. What would you pray right before your test? Okay. So, even though I'm not Catholic, I refer to that as the Hail Mary prayer. Because it's just like, all right, I did the best, now I'm just going to, God, help me out on this one. So, that you're able to remember those things that you've studied and figure that out. Okay, great answer. I like it. What else? Read the Bible. Okay, so would you do it, do you think like reading by yourself, with others? Like, what do you think? By yourself? Okay. So we got Bible, self. So now I know that I'm asking this specifically. Do you have a Bible that you're able to, when you open it up, kind of make sense for when you read it? Because there are some Bibles, and this is true for me as well, where I open it up and I don't talk like that. The Old English, the King James stuff. There are lots of folks who love that and truly, they're able to hear that, feel that. I read it and I go, I don't know. So okay, so that's why I asked. So you got a good answer. What? Anything else? Those are all good answers. The reason that I'm asking you is because in a couple of minutes I'm going to be asking, your parents and the rest of the congregation a similar sort of question. So I'm starting to prime the pump so that they can think about it now, so that when I do ask them the question, they don't have those moments of, oh my gosh, how shall I answer this? Alright? Picking up what I'm putting down there? You're like, I'm glad I'm downstairs. Yeah, that's alright, okay, alright. So, thank you very much for helping with that. But more than that, be intentional. Be intentional about having God be a part of your life. And, the answers that you've given are perfect. They're awesome. But also, it doesn't have to be as churchy as this. Be kind. Being kind is a phenomenal way of allowing God to be intentionally a part of your life and the lives of those who are around you. So, Bible reading? Yes. Praying? Yes. There's lots that you can be intentional about having God be a part of your life? Oh, it's music. Okay, so whether it's the stuff that's out of the hymnal or the stuff that Kate and Joe are able to sing for us that we're able to hear on the radio, there's all different sorts of music that is out there, and even like podcasts and all that sort of stuff that we're able to listen to that help us to get into a mindset, to begin to think and be present with God. Great answer. That was awesome. Lots of different ways. Utilize it. Whatever makes sense for you. Be intentional about having God be in and through your life. Okay, so let's offer up a word of prayer, and then we'll have that for God, thank you for today. You have blessed us in so many different ways. We thank you for today. We come to you with that prayer of thanksgiving because we want to be intentional. We want to be intentional about inviting you and recognizing you, being present with you. So help all of us, especially these kids who are with us here today. Help us to be more intentional about having you move in and through our life. Through prayer, through what we read, through what we listen to, by just being kind and loving. Lord, help us be intentional so that our life no longer is empty. All these things we do pray in Jesus' name. We taught us to pray together by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. All right. Now, I know that I'm making this up on the fly, but do you want to go to Sunday school? Yes?
Why? I have a lesson.
I know. All right, so let me rephrase that. Mrs. Cook is really excited about seeing you in Sunday school in a couple of minutes. All right, so let's head on out to Sunday school. Thank you very much. That was awesome, guys. I love that. That was awesome. Thank you very much. I love that. Oh, my God. I love you guys. I mean, that was just fantastic. It's so open the audience. You're ready to stand up. I haven't even announced it. You're ready to sing. All right, so our next hymn is hymn 375. Jesus calls us. Let us rise. Let's sing together. God, may the thoughts and meditations of our hearts and minds be connected with you. Help us to hear your voice and help us to be able to respond to it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Our opening passage for this morning is taken from the 121st Psalm. The following passage is comforting and supportive. It just is. But why? For many, especially because of when this passage is offered, at the very least offered through me, which is during funerals by and large. The why is because we need reminders. We want reminders of who is able to hold us in life and in death. I agree with that why. And I don't believe that it's the only one. I also believe that it is intended to be comforting and supportive in the days when we are able to recognize that we aren't who God ultimately wants us to be. AKA that God will be before us, that God will be behind us, above us, beneath us, as we step forward into something new, as we step into becoming that new creation. Even if that something new just feels that way because of how we're approaching it. The scripture reads this way. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. Amen. So ends the first reading. Our second reading comes to us from the book of Genesis, the 12th chapter, the first 4 verses. Our second passage is an important reminder of how deep and wide God's love is. So, before there was a Jewish religion, there was belief and there was trust. Abram, whom we ultimately get to know as Abraham, was not Jewish. There was no such thing as Judaism when he was alive. However, God was very much at work in the world and continuing to reach out to humanity, seeking ways to remind them that they would be supported by the Creator of all if they were willing to acknowledge His presence, and not only acknowledge His presence, but walk with Him. Take note. Abram responded not because he was appropriately religious. He responded because he heard the voice of God whisper into his life, and then he went. He literally picked up his life and he moved to a foreign land. He did that because he was listening. Last Sunday I gave some homework responding to the reality that we cannot live our lives as usual, that we need to no longer take God and our faith for granted and instead be intentional in our faith walk. So how are we like Abraham? How are you, no longer living life as usual? The scripture reads this way. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram went, as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So end the readings from God's holy word. May you take them into your hearts and truly live them. This is the word of the Lord. So when I stand before you, I feel like I am led to give you an action-steppable thought that encourages you to put your faith into action. So when I stand up here and do a sermon, that's hopefully where I end up getting to. Now yes, there are some times when I provide a whole lot of contextual background to the scripture that we're hearing, and I still hope that at the end of the day, you're able to go, okay, here's a thought that I'm able to implant into my week, into my day, and let it grow as God would have it grow. I'm going to flip it today. Here's the takeaway for today. God's got you. Now go. I wrote that, and I thought, oh, geez, what if a bunch of people hear that, stand up, and leave? Because I just told them, and go. All right. What do I do then if people just stand up and leave? But I left the line there anyway, if for no other reason, because I know that the societal norms that we have, especially in the contextual setting of the church, lean hard on you to stay in your seat until the person up front says, Amen. If that is true, and I absolutely believe that it is, then what other cultural norms are we succumbing to? Possibly, or is it probably, even without thinking about it? In so many ways, our lives are cattle shooting because of the expectation of the world around us and the limitations that we feel are personally wrapped around us. We can't say this or we have to say that. It's good to go here, but we definitely shouldn't be going there. Those people are desirable, while those others, well, we know they're not, because that's what we've been told. Maybe that's what we've told ourselves. What would have happened? What would have happened if Abram was not open to no longer living life as usual? What would have happened if he just stayed in southern Turkey, where he was, with his family? Some sarcastic people would say that the world would be better off because the religion, as we know it, Judaism, which ultimately then births the Islamic and the Christian faith, would have stopped before it started. Sarcastic people would absolutely say that. I find that mindset to be incredibly short-sighted because people are people, which means that even if we didn't have religion as we know it, humanity ultimately would have been led to find other ways to pervert how God would have us live with one another. We would have just found a different way to do it. Instead, I look at the question that what would have happened if Abram was not open to no longer living life as usual. And what I focus upon are the reminders of God's presence that we would have missed out on. We're in the 12th chapter of Genesis. Think of all that has yet to be told in the midst of the biblical narrative. We're in the front, 12th chapter of Genesis. All of these different stories of history, all of these different prophecies, all of these different hymns, all of these different ways of God whispering into the world and our lives. Thankfully, Abram, in this instance, was not beholden to the cultural and self-limiting constructs that I'm sure that he felt and he absolutely faced. He knew that he was supported by God and that he was being led to step into a life that was anything but usual. God led him, he went. What about us? There are a few of you who responded to the homework that I gave last Sunday. And by a few, I mean 5. Thank you. All of it. And I mean that. Here are some of the things that I heard that I heard from you in terms of taking intentional steps to no longer live as usual. One of you is shifting your work schedule around in order to attend a small group. Another one of you is praying intentionally for a family member and for yourself, especially when stressful situations begin to make themselves known. So there's that intentional prayer. A couple of you are listening to music that reminds you of the promises that God has for us. One of you has begun a time of learning how to be a person who steps back. Here's an interesting one. A person who steps back and listens for God's leading, which is not easy, instead of taking the bull by the horn and just charging into whatever is next. And finally, another person has said that they're being very intentional about reaching out to people whom they haven't reached out to over the course of the last year. They're sending notes. They're being thoughtful about whom they haven't been in contact with. I love all of that. I really do. Because all of it is intentional in terms of being open to how God is whispering into our lives. These 5 people were reminded in some small way that they were supported by God and they went, regardless of the societal or self-imposed construct that may have been there previously. Can you tell that I'm being felt that I'm feeling led to push this idea a little bit? Just a little bit, yeah. We cannot live our lives as usual and expect that God is magically going to restore, to renew, to refresh. We are the hands, we are the feet of God. We need to trust the promise that we are supported by this God and step forward. Step forward into possibly new areas that are very unfamiliar. that we are ultimately going to be led in one way or another to a path that is of restoration, renewal, refreshment, that God is able to breathe into our life and into the lives of those who are around us. It's you, it's me, it's us being faithful, not religious, but faithful to the God who has promised to keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. So what does that look like? What does that sound like? What does being faithful feel like for you? Okay, I need my scribe.
I know. I mean, why would Pastor Ryan bring this board and just have it sitting there unless he was going to actively use it in the midst of worship service? Okay. That's all good. All right. So we got this. Let me get the dry erase markers here. Now, much like I started with kids, and Stephanie, thank you very much for my scribe. Her handwriting is much prettier than mine. Much like I started out with kids, this doesn't need to be about you. Okay? Think about somebody else. What's a way that we can be intentional about our life no longer being as usual? I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes the idea that makes sense for me is spurred when I hear somebody else say something which I wasn't able to think about. I also recognize that there are many of us who are not straight auditory learners. I look over at Sally and I'm like, okay, here's a high school teacher. Should defer to this. Now some of us need to see it up on a board. So we're going to have it up on the board so that we can see it. What are some ways that we can be intentional about no longer living life as usual? What are some whispers that God is putting out into our lives to shift things out? What are some ways? Joining groups. Okay. So you can use whatever color. Be colorful. All different sorts of color. All right. So Lou said joining groups. Anything when you say joining groups, how do you mean?
I was thinking that I did mention about those.
Okay, so Lou attended the men's group for the first time this past Thursday morning. It was an awesome addition. Not to butter you up, but you were an awesome addition. Absolutely true. So join new groups. What else? What are some other ideas?
I wrote a devotional for Thomas instead of me. So instead of me not actually doing the devotional, Thomas keeps me on track and we do it together.
Okay, so you bought is it a Lenten devotional or daily devotional?
It didn't say it was, but it happens to be 46 chapters long, so.
Okay, so it's a Lenten devotional probably the way you're, okay. So a Lenten devotional, you're using it with your son, and he's like, hey mom, we need to do the devotional, because I don't know about you, how many of us start something, and then about 3 minutes later, we forget that we need to do it, because we have other stuff we need to do. That's awesome. So you find someone to hold you accountable. That's very cool. All right. I don't know how you want to write that.
Can I bring that under prayer?
No, this isn't under. We're just putting the stuff up there. So this is not an under. Just getting some things up there. Okay, devotional. Perfect. All right. So look into the possibility of doing mission trip, and that is something that doesn't need to be done through the church. Like Sue Newborn right now is serving in she's serving in Nashville. She's helping those who are dealing with the horrific tragedy of the tornadoes that took place this past week. And then this is one where you call, you go. Some of us are able to do that. If you feel that in your life, respond to that. Yeah.
Making new friends and becoming closer to God.
I love that. All right. Making new friends. That's one of those where, I don't know about you, the introvert that I am, I struggle putting myself out. If I could blend into the wall, by and large, if I could blend into the wallpaper, I would blend into the wallpaper, and I would feel so much more comfortable living in that space. That isn't the space that God wants us to be in. I'm not saying that he's standing up here is fake. What's that?
I can't spell.
No, that is, there's no judgment at all. But being willing to put yourself out there. To maybe make an interaction with somebody that you would have never done before. Jill?
Scheduling some time on a Sunday to just think, because I'm really good at good intentions but not actually doing anything. So to schedule the time to focus but I can think, what is it I want to do, so I actually may do it.
All right, so being intentional about scheduling your time. So schedule, we'll put that.
Okay.
So that's a great answer. Thank you. Sure.
Looking out for marginalized, people who are just, even at the office or in the community, people who are typically on their own, left alone. I always try to reach out to those folks, because oftentimes, they just need someone to talk to, and they may be introverted, they may have things that are weighing on them, but.
Yeah. So keep looking out, being intentional about being observant for those who are on the margins, however that is for us. Because every one of us has different margins. So that means that our circles are going to be different. That's a good answer. Helen? Yeah.
Having more patience.
Having more patience. What are you talking about?
No.
So having more patience. Enough said. So having more patience.
When you say, we talked about this in a small group, when you say have somebody in your thoughts and prayers, or I'm praying for you, actually intentionally doing that, almost praying before you write it in the card, which was Genesis.
Okay. So being intentional in terms of that prayer. Being able to say it and mean it in the moment of, you're in my thoughts and prayers, but then follow through. And allow that person to be in your thoughts and prayers. Because, for me, when that happens, I'm able to feel that whisper in my life of, here's a way that you can step in. Here's a way that you can be present. I feel that sometimes when I am intentional in that space. Great. Yeah.
Usually within an hour of leaving here on Sunday, I have two people who will remain nameless that come over for lunch.
Yeah.
And they always ask me, how is church? And my life as usual response is, well, if you would have showed up, you would have known.
All right.
And I guess maybe I should really tell them how church was.
Yeah, all right. So this is one where I kind of put that under the patience a little bit as well. But that's one where describe it and be able to say, well, here's what I got. And this is something that we're stepping into, which is new with our church. We're actually recording the services so that on Wednesday the service goes up and we're able to, if you weren't here, you're able to see it. You're able to hear it. You're able to worship in that moment. Or if it was just that movie, you're able to watch it again and be right there again. But that's an opportunity to be able to say to your friends, your nameless friends, hey, come, watch. So if you happen to be watching this right now, hi, it's good to have you be a part of the service. So that's the way to be able to be a part.
Surrounding yourself with positive people, it's so easy to fall into negative gossip and just emotions and looking at the dark side of everything.
Okay. So who are we surrounding ourselves with? What voices are we listening to? And the reality is that there will always be negative voices in the midst of the world. But you also need to be able to have those voices around you that are able to hold you up. So, who are you surrounding yourself with? I don't know how you want to write that one down. I trust yourself. I really do. What are some other ways? What are some other things? Positivity. There we go. Staying positive. We're finding positive. Other thoughts? Other ways? Okay. Look up the list. And steps back. Look up at the list. Are you able to see yourself? Are you able to see someone else? Are looking up at these different words? Okay. Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it very much. Are you able to look up at these words and see life no longer as usual? That wasn't planned, but it worked pretty well. Are you able to find a way to no longer live your life as usual, but instead live your life intentionally? Find those ways. Be intentional in those ways. Step forward in those ways. They're going to be different for all of us because God has created us in different ways. Please be God. Be intentional. No longer live your life as usual. This is something that God is whispering into our lives in a fresh way. Or maybe it's just mild. No, it's not. Let us listen to that whisper. Let us pray. Holy and gracious God, we thank you for the ways that you are leading us to no longer live our life as usual. Help us. Help us, Lord, to be intentional about inviting you in so that you may be our hands and our feet. Your very light in the midst of the world today. God, thank you for this conversation. In Jesus' name we do pray. All God's children said. You now have the opportunity to give of our time and our office. So let's give back to God. Let's have this conversation.
Generous God, you shower us with gifts, including the greatest gift of all, your own Son, Jesus Christ. In thanksgiving and praise, we offer you our time, our money, and our very selves. In these actions, we proclaim our intention to be a blessing in your world. Lord, let it be so. Amen. Please be seated. Let us pray. God, as we gather into this sanctuary, we are able to be reminded through Scripture, through Psalm, through your presence in the midst of us, as we hear one another's voices. We are able to be reminded that you don't want us to live life as usual, that you want us to be intentional in our faithful steps. Not religious, faithful. Intentionally inviting you in so that you may work through our hands, through our feet, sometimes even through our voice. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to be able to be reminded of these opportunities, these ways that you are whispering into our life, saying, I am with you, now go. Help us to go. Whatever that means for us, help us to go. It is in that place of being intentional that we come to you with our joys and our concerns. We do pray for Sue and all those who are in and around Nashville, helping those who are really struggling.
frightening realities of the tornado that touched down this past week, as well as all of those who are dealing around the world, who are dealing with, who are, and even afraid of, the realities and perceived realities of Corona as it moves through the world. We pray for Blanche, for Michael, for Luke, for Don, for Chris, for Melissa, for Jim, for Claire, for Joe, for Steph. We pray for Meredith and Austin, Casey, Jack, and Carter, for Logan and Kate, for Adele and Lois, for Haldry, for Lois and Sue, for Kim and Sue. We pray for Ed and Joanne. We also pray for Dylan and his family on the unexpected death of his brother this morning. Hold their family up in prayer. We hold them up in prayer, and as those who are connected with their family are able to express ways to care for them, if we're able, help us to be that presence as well. We pray for Jeremy and Susan as they serve in the year, for Jan and Steve, for all our kids and the different families that we're connected with down in Susavant and Haiti, for all of those who serve in the military connected with our congregation. We pray for Ben and Carlos, Joel and Nick, Seppi, Kenneth, Tanner, for Sean, for Joe. We also pause so that we might be able to offer up to you all of the joys and concerns that we do carry with us, the quiet of our hearts and minds. Lord, hear our prayers in the quiet of this moment. God, thank you for today. And for the reminder that you are with us. And that the fact that you are with us, we are able to intentionally step into a life that is anything but usual. God, thank you. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
It's all right as we respond to this last song. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna in the highest. Need you, Lord. Hosanna in the highest.
We started thinking about how to be intentional, about how to step into our life no longer as usual, intentionally living as God would have us live. If you feel yourself responding to one of these, continue to step into that space. If this leads you to that next thing, which makes sense for you, follow that path. God whispered into Abram's ear and said, I need you to go down to Canaan. I need you to pick up your entire life and go. He listened. He went. And the world has been forever changed. And I say that change has been for good. Listen to that whisper. Follow. Now with the power of God the Father, the love of God the Son, the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you now and forevermore.